One. Roll.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a very special Facebook Live installment of the Scrum. I'm Adam Riley, reporter here at WGBH News, and this guy right next to me is my distinguished colleague, Peter Kadzis, a senior editor at WGBH. Peter and I do a podcast called The Scrum, which is about Massachusetts politics. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and various other platforms. You can find it online at blogs.wgbh.org/scrum. But tonight, we are talking to you via Facebook about the big Boston Mayoral debate that's coming up here at WGBH in a little bit under 30 minutes, I believe. Peter, you have covered many of these mayoral contests over the years. You're a Boston native. You've covered Boston politics for a long time. What has your take been on the way this race has unfolded so far? Has it gone more or less according to script?
I don't know what the script was. I think someone lost it. I mean, I think it's unfolded slowly. It really hasn't taken much shape since after the preliminary election. You know, tonight is going to be one of the real high points of the race. As I think everyone who hasn't been living under a rock knows, incumbent Mayor Marty Walsh has a comfortable lead.
Leading about 2-1, right? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 percentage points.
Yeah. Challenger City Councilor Tito Jackson of Roxbury has to really score big time today for two reasons. One, to see if he can do what many people think is a very tough thing and, equal or beat the mayor. And secondly, there's a post-election career. What happens if he does not pull it off?
Yeah, and historically, there hasn't really been any room, right, for people who run for mayor and lose, with maybe the notable exception of Michael Flaherty.
Michael Flaherty, who then went back to the council. John Conley, in fairness, made a career switch.
That's a good point. He's running in an open race, but your point is well taken.
He ran in the open race.
And barely, yeah, you were just going to say.
The closest race in 25 years.
Which I always forget. It's like every time I'm reminded of that, I'm amazed by it. A couple thousand votes and he would have been mayor.
And he made a career switch. I mean, he's now in, he's in the education business. Yeah. He's an education consultant, an education reformer. And I would add, last week endorsed Mayor Marty Walsh.
Yep, not a bad pickup. So what do you expect to happen in the debate this evening? What do you expect how do you expect, I should say, the two candidates to approach the contest?
Well, Mayor Walsh will be conservative. That's typically what someone with a big lead does. Now, I should say the textbook says the mayor will play it conservatively. Maybe he'll upend the textbook. For Tito Jackson, he really needs to come out charging. What I want to see is when and how Tito plays what I'm going to call the race card. Now, I don't mean
that in a pejorative sense.
I don't mean that taking out a flamethrower and trying to crisp the city to bring us back to the bad old days from 43 years ago when there was court-ordered desegregation.
Which you covered.
Yeah.
You covered the busing battles. So you're not playing the race card in
pre-computer days. That's how typewriter days.
So when you talk about Jackson playing the race card, what do you mean?
Well, what I mean is his natural strength, his theme is that the gap between rich and poor in Boston is growing wider, and that the incumbent mayor is not doing enough to narrow it. The NAACP a report came out Monday, which has really been I would say, the only break Councilor Jackson has had. The NAACP essentially gave the Walsh administration bad marks for how it has dealt with the African American and Latino communities, largely on economic grounds. This is a theme that Tito has been working with varying degrees of success since before he announced for mayor.
Yeah.
The way, and what's interesting is that NAACP report, which sounds very damning of the mayor, and from the right point of view, could be considered that. It nevertheless fits with the larger picture of Boston that emerged when WGBH News did some polling. And by the way, our results are very consistent with what the Boston Globe found and what WBUR found as well. But the way I sum it up is that Bostonians in general are, to varying degrees, optimistic about the future. But Marty Walsh voters see the glass of Boston as half full. Tito Jackson voters see it as half empty.
That sounds about right.
Now, Tito needs to play to that, but he needs to persuade Walsh voters to come over to his side.
I want to make an observation about Walsh's response to that on NAACP scorecard, but before I do, I should note to everyone who's watching out there a couple things. It is not just going to be Peter and I flapping our gums for the next 30 minutes, as much as everyone would love to see that, and we'd love to do it. We have 4 expert guests who are going to be joining us. Megan Irons from the Boston Globe, Lauren Dezensky from Politico, Gin Dempsey from Mass Live, and Ken Cooper, who is your fellow senior editor here at WGBH.
Yes, and your podmate.
And my podmate. So,
there we go.
So they're going to be coming, and I would also like to note that we'd love to get questions from anyone who happens to be watching this. We can't guarantee that we'll answer every question that is submitted, but if there is something that you'd like us to tackle, leave a comment underneath the video feed that you're watching right now, and we'll try to get to it. I was struck with Marty Walsh's response to that NAACP report at the very muted way he I can't even say he pushed back at it. I mean, he said something like, well, I'm taking this as, you know, a list of things, a list of areas that I can work on to do even better. Just sort of no defensiveness, no testiness. I think of Walsh, and perhaps I say this because I'm a defensive human myself, I think of him as a politician who is a little quick to retreat into a defensive posture and sometimes to get aggressive as a result, and I didn't hear any of that in the wake of the NAACP report. Do you think that's just because he is supremely confident at this point in time?
Yes.
There we go.
The mayor is usually testy, but I think he was wise to be unruffled by this because he has solid and decent support in the black community. And
he's leading Tito Jackson by a fairly wide margin, though not as wide as with other demographics.
But again, as our poll, as the WGBH poll showed, Boston voters are smart. They understand that the big picture is Boston's doing well. That doesn't mean everyone's doing well. And the mayor would be making a big mistake if he sort of kicked the wrong community in the shins here. So he's wise to be statesmanlike.
Let me ask you, in part because I'm a sucker for this stuff, as someone who didn't grow up in the city and learned about city politics from you at the Phoenix more than anyone else.
Thank you.
You know,
You poor
no, it's a very good thing, and it's my pleasure. What were the races that over the years have been most intense and competitive, even though no incumbent has lost since 1949? I have in my head those White Timilty races where Joe Timilty tried to unseat Kevin White. Am I right that those were some examples of an incumbent really getting a run for their money from a strong challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I was a kid then, but I grew up in a very political neighborhood, right where Dorchester, basically at the line where Irish Catholic Dorchester met Jewish Mattapan.
Which would be what parish?
St. Gregory's Parish,
About the parish, right?
Ward 17, about a mile away from the Erie Pub in Ward 16.
Gentleman's Prestige Bar.
Yeah. I don't know, my memory is that nothing has been as intense as the Kevin White, Louise Day Hicks races, or the Kevin White, Joe Timilty races. By the time you had the Flynn Mel King race, which was very intense, the city was just beginning to heal from busing. It was in no way healed, but both candidates were being very careful to keep the level of discourse high. There was nothing high about the level of discourse in the Flynn Timilty races.
Or you mean the White Hicks?
White Hicks, I'm sorry.
Now, was that in part because with Kevin White and Louise Day Hicks, you had two radically different, I don't know if political philosophies is the right term, but at a bare minimum, very different visions for what kind of community Boston should be. in a way that you don't? In a way
Well,
like this one?
the thing about Kevin White and Louise Day Hicks and Kevin White and Timothy is that was a tribal battle. That was a battle within tribal Irish Boston. And it was almost between, it was between Kevin White voters who were attracted to the Kennedy family. They were more optimistic about the future, while Louise Day Hicks voters, who probably did vote for Kennedy, nevertheless had sort of a Nixonian undertone. I mean, Kevin White himself, many years after all these races were over, I was on Charles Street and ran into Kevin White, having his ice cream cone, walking around with his sleeves rolled up. And Kevin White said, look, I was the beneficiary of, working class families who aspired to the middle class. Those are the people who worked. Ken, what a surprise.
Hey, what's up, guys?
How's it going? This is, as promised, WGBH Senior Editor Ken Cooper. And Ken, because I take some kind of vicarious pride in this, can you, for everyone watching at home, for anyone who might be thinking, well, who's Ken Cooper? Can you give them your insanely powerful and potent journalistic resume and talk about some of the politics you've covered over the years?
Well, my colleague here, Peter Katzis, decides the senior editor at the GBH is an old print guy, which means I guess I qualify for that.
That's right.
But I've covered elections for about 30 years. My first federal election was in 1986, when the previous Joseph Kennedy got elected to Congress from Boston, the father of the current congressman.
And you were at the Globe at that point? Is that
I was
right?
at the Globe, and then I was down in Washington for 12 years and covered 2 cycles of House races and covered 1 presidential race with a guy named Dukakis from Brookline, Mass.
Then you were overseas for a bit?
And covered elections in India and places like that. So
Solid. I think that qualifies you to join us to talk about this. So let me start just by asking, I know we don't have a ton of time, the same question I asked Peter. Has this race transpired the way you thought it would? Has the arc been what you expected?
the question is like Peter asked, if there was a script, is there an arc? It's kind of a flat line, actually. I mean, obviously everybody expected Tito Jackson to make the final in the preliminary, so I guess that was a little bit of an arc, but it's hard to see how much has changed since then, or it hasn't been a hell of a lot of engagement.
Let me switch for a second. We've been talking about politics. Let's talk about policy.
Are you sure you want to do that?
I know, we'll let a little substance creep into the debate. But the issue I've been waiting to hear discussed, and maybe during the debate tonight they'll get into it, is the need for closing or consolidating schools in Boston. Now, Mayor Walsh acts sort of like Richard Nixon did when Nixon was running for president, as if Nixon claimed to have a secret plan for ending the war in Vietnam. Marty Walsh seems to act as if he has a secret plan for fixing Boston schools. Now, Tito, on the other hand, doesn't really say Tito just gives the impression that over his dead body will any schools be closed or consolidated. What do you make of this?
Well, I guess both of them are surprised, playing politics. The mayor wouldn't want to suggest that he might actually close schools because he doesn't want to offend any particular school constituency.
Right.
And Tito Jackson is sort of bidding him one better, is basically suggesting he wouldn't ever close any schools, which is pretty much an irresponsible position from a fiscal point of view. It's a little bit like taking a no new taxes pledge when you're sort of saying
I like that analogy.
no matter
Similar.
what happens with the
Yeah.
economy or the budget, you wouldn't raise taxes. And it would actually be, a failure of leadership if you have Boston schools where enrollments dwindle to less than half a capacity or 25% and keep them open just to keep the school open, as opposed to consolidating them and use tax dollars much more efficiently and hopefully more effectively to educate young people.
Yeah, I remember when Carol Johnson was superintendent of schools, I went to the school committee meeting the night she was scheduled to announce a limited number of school closings. I forget the actual number. It might have been as small as 9, might have been much more, but the number of schools weren't what was important. What really struck me was just how vociferous the opposition to this was. Even though it was, to me, a Boston public school parent, vitally necessary to save money. But the parents and their kids who were there, you couldn't convince them otherwise. And the Boston school committee members who were backing her completely, just took a huge amount of abuse. I mean,
well, part of it, you know, and the previous mayor, the late Mayor Menino, sort of started this, where, you know, this emphasis on neighborhood schools,
Yeah.
and people's attachment to them has grown, even though there is actually no evidence in the literature that a school in your own neighborhood is better than a school somewhere else. And if you think about it, the very best school in Boston, Boston Latin,
Your
is
alma
hardly
mater.
a neighborhood
Yeah.
school.
that's true.
It's not at all. It's the opposite of a neighborhood school.
You know, as a non-Boston resident, though, I can understand. I have a couple kids in the public schools in the suburb where I live, in Swampscott, and the emotional attachment that you do develop, which it's not necessarily rational, it's not about outcomes, it's just about the sense of community that can be created around a particular place in our atomized world. There's a gravity to that. So in a way, I can understand why parents would have that reaction, even if big picture it doesn't make a lot
So
of
it
sense.
happens outside of Boston, too. Anyway, nice talking to you guys.
Ken,
Take care.
thank you.
See you
Talk to
tomorrow.
later. Oh,
Do we have
some-
questions?
We do have questions. Here's one that.
And I'll
and
see
we,
Ken.
and
And another guest.
How's it going, Lauren?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I guess since I shook Ken's hand, thank you very much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Would you like to introduce yourself to all the many Facebook Live viewers who we're talking to right now?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Lauren Desensky. I'm the author of the Massachusetts Playbook. I work for Politico, Massachusetts.
The Massachusetts Playbook, which has been called an essential read.
Yes, by
Yeah.
many.
By many.
People say many things.
And the host
many
of a new
people.
and competing podcast. After spending all this time with Peter and I on the Scrum, you went out and you had so much fun with us that you decided to do it on your own.
Adam, I can't believe you're outing me on Facebook
I'm trying to-
Live.
I'm trying
the
to-
horse
We're
race.
trying to
No,
give you a
I appreciate
boost.
it. I appreciate
The
it.
horse race with the excellent Steve Cazella.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's fantastic. It drops every Friday morning.
So now that we've done that, had that awkward moment, would you like to take a question with Peter and I, or do you want to talk about other stuff? Can you
Let's
take a
take
question
a
with us?
question.
All right.
Let's do it.
First question from Twitter, the popular microblogging site.
Oh, give me a break.
First question from Twitter is, I guess, sort of a statement / question. Candidates' approaches to funding Boston public schools? So that's the question or talking point. What can we tell whoever tweeted that or DM'd WGBH
Right.
News about how they may differ when it comes to funding public schools? Or maybe what their competing claims are about the funding of public schools. That's what springs to mind for me, right? Because Tito Jackson routinely says that Marty Walsh has cut Boston public schools by, is it $140 million? I think that's the figure. And Marty Walsh and his surrogates routinely say the Boston public schools budget is bigger than it's ever been. Peter, you spend a lot of time looking at schools. Lauren, you spend a lot of time looking at Boston politics. How do you reconcile those claims?
I mean, I think this is something where you do see differences between the two candidates, which you can't necessarily see in other issues when you look at the race itself. And honestly, I think that this is something that we'll see vetted in the debate tonight.
What's the answer, Peter? Who is right?
Well,
or are they both right?
They're both right. I think they're both denying reality. In a way, this is what we were talking about with Ken. You know, the mayor is not forthright. He's commissioned a study that says the city can save $80 million annually by closing and consolidating schools. Tito says, pshaw, you know.
But also, you are kind of my key source of information when it comes to the schools because you know them so well, having been a Boston Public Schools parent. My understanding, tell me if I'm wrong, is that the Walsh administration has cut funding in certain areas while also increasing the overall budget. Is that a fair explanation of how
That
those
is
two
a fair
things-
explanation. As a matter of fact, my son's high school lost a couple of people because of that. And
Teachers.
teachers
Yeah.
or teachers' aides or program people. And I don't know how my son, who's 18, is going to vote, but he was very aware of losing those teachers. But what do you make of all this? How does it look from the State House?
I mean, from the State House, it kind of speaks to the race itself. This is, the Boston Mayoral race 4 years ago was the biggest thing that anyone was talking about.
Yeah,
and
it was a
now
lot of fun to cover.
Exactly, and now it's barely registering a whisper, honestly.
So why, other than the fact that incumbents almost never lose, why do you think that is?
I think it speaks to the campaigns themselves, specifically the challenger. Tito Jackson never really caught fire in a way that people thought that he would when he announced his campaign back in January.
But you also think, and just to give you a little sausage making information, we talked before the cameras were rolling about how this has been a race. In your, what was your characterization? Because it was very process, not...
It's process instead of policy.
Thank you.
The conversation that is dominated in Boston and kind of among the chattering class hasn't necessarily been on the issues like the schools. It's been more about the debates that Marty Walsh says that he's going to and Tito Jackson challenges him to go to more.
Right.
It's issues around the way that the NAACP, questionnaire were phrased as opposed to the actual issues that are being discussed.
It's whether our colleague David Bernstein accurately reported the Boston Police Department's very poor clearance rate for non-fatal shootings, or whether a different metric should have been used. Now, is that because Tito Jackson hasn't staked out a bold alternate vision, or maybe because when it comes right down to it, he's a pretty liberal Democrat, and Marty Walsh is, at least at this point in time, a pretty liberal Democrat too, and they view the world the same way?
I think it could be, the fact that the Jackson campaign hasn't necessarily seized on it. You're not seeing narratives necessarily built up, but the Walsh administration or the Walsh campaign really isn't doing a good job of knocking things down. So everything just kind of lingers, and it looks messy at the end of the day.
I can't tell if I'm getting a time cue. I'm
Yes.
getting a quick...
I'm getting the hook.
Okay, I guess I wanted to ask you the most awkward question of the entire night, but I think we're going to have to leave it for our next guest.
Oh, you got a hand?
Well, okay, all right. So I appreciate that enthusiasm, by the way.
I only say that because I know the question.
That's right, you got a little time to prep. I want to know, as you know, why it is that this big question mark hanging over the Walsh administration, I'm talking about the upcoming federal trial of Ken Brissett and Tim Sullivan, two top City Hall aides to the mayor who are still on paid administrative leave, why this hasn't been more of an issue in the race. Voters don't seem to hold it against the mayor, even though nothing like this ever happened when Tom Menino was in office, and Jackson doesn't seem to have leveraged this. Why has this been a non-issue?
It doesn't appear to be an issue for the voters, in Boston. I mean, look.
Shouldn't it be, though?
It's a 35-point margin between Marty Walsh and Tito Jackson. If it is, it's not registering in the polls.
All right. So we'll give Gin a try at
That's
this
my
and see if
hard
it's the same answer.
All right.
Lauren, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Talk to you later.
Go again.
Again, hustle over here.
And the reason we're rushing now, I just want to put this on the table, is because my time management has been extremely poor. So don't blame Peter, blame me. Gin, how's it going?
Pretty good.
Can you introduce yourself to the good people watching at home?
Sure. Gin Dumchus with MassLive.com. Used to be at Dorchester Reporter and State House News Service.
Why is the mayor getting a pass on the corruption trial?
I think it's because it comes down to the thing where people like him. I think in general they find him a likable guy, and they're not making that connection necessarily. The other thing too with voters is they don't like acknowledging they've made a mistake, especially
that's a
this
good
quick.
insight.
Now I hadn't
I
thought
love
of that.
Sounds like a TED Talk in the making.
I don't know about that.
Spend a
but-
couple hours on that, and we'll say we knew you went.
Sure, but
No, that's a very good insight.
But and I think for a lot of voters, they'd rather stick with who they know. I think the trouble for Tito Jackson is he has to make two arguments, right? He has to argue that Marty Walsh isn't doing a good job, and he has to also argue that he's the replacement,
Right.
and he's the one that voters should pick. And I think for voters, they're saying we're okay with Marty for now.
Has he, given that he has a very tough job, has he done as good a job making a sustained, cohesive, and creative argument that he's a strong alternative to the mayor as he could have?
No.
Why not?
And let me elaborate a little bit. I think it's some of that is because he is running at times what it seems like a city council campaign when he's running for mayor. And
What do you mean?
And in terms of some of the staffing and in terms of the overall level of the campaign, it's just not there yet. And he has some time to make a case, but the window is closing. I think tonight for him, he really has to hammer home some points. He has to bait Marty Walsh into possibly a moment. And I think
Where the mayor loses his cool or something?
and that's possible. I think with the mayor, he doesn't like claims to go unanswered, and that's very tough for him.
We should let Megan weigh in on this.
We should let Megan weigh in.
bring her in?
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's bring her on in. Again, thanks for hanging
Thank
out.
you.
Sorry
Thank
we're
you.
rushing you out the door again. Blame me, not Peter.
And we're going
Sit down there.
Hello.
Megan
Megan.
Irons, how's
Hi.
it going?
of the Globe,
Yes,
Fantastic.
Megan Irons of the paper of record, the
That's
Boston
right, the
Globe.
Boston Globe.
which
You're-
endorsed Marty Walsh.
Which endorsed Marty Walsh, although
Yes.
you did not endorse Marty Walsh.
What do I have to do with this?
And you're the City Hall Bureau Chief.
Yes, I am. Outgoing for the next couple of weeks.
So what's your new beacon be? by the way?
Social justice. I'm very excited about that, and that will happen after the election.
Cool. So what are you looking to see happen here this evening? Gin was predicting. Predict some more for us.
Yeah, I think Tito Jackson at this point has nothing to lose. His back is against the wall. He's way behind in the polls. His message isn't really resonating among voters. And so he's got to go for it and go for it really hard. I think the mayor, who you mentioned this, he tends to get very upset. The trick for him tonight is to be calm and be cool, be methodical in his answers, and present himself as the mayor that he's been campaigning on and trying to be. You talked about some of the hiccups that Tito Jackson had earlier on. I think he came out at the beginning of the year very optimistic. There was a lot of, I think, buzz when he first announced, and then it just fizzled because Donald Trump intervened with, saying.
I'm really glad you brought that up.
That's a valid point.
Yes, and so the mayor was on TV. He was being the mayor, projecting this image of strength. Tito Jackson couldn't catch a breath after that, I think. Support dried up. He couldn't get any money. His campaign manager left. He was, from my observation, pretty much running the campaign by himself.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I kind of felt it was him and a small group of people, whereas the mayor, and he will acknowledge this, has been running a campaign since he started in office.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tito Jackson came out strong a little bit, stumbled, and never quite got his footing.
I have a question for you. I posited this on Twitter a little while ago and got a lot of pushback from Tito Jackson supporters who took vigorous issue with the way we in the press have covered the race.
Yeah.
It's my sense that Jackson could have been more creative when it came to running this again, very difficult race.
Yeah.
For example, I have it in my head, if he'd wanted to have a press conference about affordable housing back in the spring, in May or June, or maybe start in September, he could have done something like go stand in front of Millennium Tower, the super high-end development downtown, and say, Mayor Marty Walsh says that we can build our way to keeping Boston affordable. Well, here's an example of what's been getting built under Mayor Walsh. Let me tell you who lives here. Let me tell you how much the units cost. This approach is not going to do it. We need something new. I think the press would have wanted to cover events like that, and I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I mean, he did try on a couple of these issues to get the press to come out, but it's really difficult to be strategic and to think long-term when you have an organizational and money problem.
Yeah.
So you're trying to raise money, you're trying to get your organization together. You feel the tide shifting against you because everyone knows that in Boston, power lies in the mayor's office.
Yep.
So everyone is kind of shifting away from you, and you're trying to hold it together. So one of the things I did learn about this campaign is just how powerful the office of the mayor is in Boston, and he has the jobs. He has he gets the final say.
Yeah, all the
and
levels of
so if there's not an open seat and you're a challenger, the odds, the barriers are just they're insurmountable. And so you're just kind of running from behind and scrambling all the way to the end. Yeah.
I guess I'm looking at the clock. We should probably let you go down and cover the debate, right? It's a
Yes.
little more important than this
Yeah.
We
conversation.
all have to go to our real jobs.
Megan Irons, thank you
Thank
for
you.
Thanks a lot,
Thank
Megan.
you.
Take care.
luck
Good
in the
luck
new
in the new
beat.
beat.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So I guess that is going to do it. Do we have time, Annie, for a quick one question? One question only. Sorry to everyone who submitted questions. All right, a statement, another question statement. Amazon exacerbate problems. Affordable housing, traffic, public transit. True or false, Peter Kadzis?
True.
True. All right, we can sneak another one in, right? By the way, I would echo Peter's true. I think it'll cause big problems on all those fronts as well as bring benefits. Another one, climate change. How will Boston deal?
It's a long-term answer.
Big long-term answer.
Big
Right-
long-term answer.
So
We
far,
need to do more.
So far, we should note we've been letting developers do an array of things that they choose from. Haven't been saying that developers have to do certain things. We might see that in the next mayoral term. whoever
I hope we
wins.
do.
All right, Andy, is that a wrap?
That's a wrap.
Thank you to
night.
everyone who watched. Please stay tuned to watch the debate on Channel 2, watch it on Facebook Live, or listen to it on 89.7 WGBH Radio. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Peter.
Ross, you can say whatever you want.
I had no idea how much time we had gone through.
I was